Unfortunately, most people view language as grammar and rules and concrete concepts. But we need to think about language differently. Recently, I spoke to Peter Gärdenfors, Professor of Cognitive Science at Lund University in Sweden. His interest in language spans human evolution, human cognition, philosophy, and conceptual spaces. In this interview, we talk about some of the more abstract concepts of language and language learning, and I really hope that it changes the way that you see language. So, for people who don't know you and your work, could you just talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I'm a cognitive scientist. Basically, that means a jack of all trades. I mean, I combine philosophy with linguistics and psychology and computer science and everything. It's about theories of thinking. And one of my research areas is how to describe meanings of words. That's called semantics. So I develop models for describing meanings of words.
The reason that I got in contact with you is because actually, I don't know if you know of the website Reddit.
No, I know of it, but I don't use it.
Yeah, so basically on Reddit there's a part of it which is all about linguistics. And somebody asked the question, what is a book that you read that completely blew your mind about linguistics? And someone said, Peter Gärdenfors' Semantic Spaces. And I thought, wow, what is this thing? And then I read about your ideas, and it is kind of an incredible theory. I mean, could you explain what it means, the geometry of meaning?
Well, there are two basic traditions in linguistics. One is the Chomskyan one that focuses almost exclusively on grammar. I mean, the grammatical structure of language. And Chomsky is not really interested in the meanings of words. And then the other tradition is called cognitive linguistics that tries to find connections between what you think, what you hear, what you see, perception and memory and so on, and how we use language. And as I see it, the meaning of words relate much more to the cognitive aspects than to the grammatical aspects of language.
Could you talk a bit more specifically about semantic spaces and about how maybe meaning could be based on geometry? I mean, it's a wild concept.
Yeah, I call them conceptual spaces, but to give one simple example, consider colors. And we can describe our perception of colors in a space. I think many people are familiar with the color circle. I mean, there's red, blue, green, yellow, and it goes around like this. And then there is light, white and dark. I mean, that's another dimension. And these two, the circle and the light dark, they form a kind of space. It's actually like a double cone because the white part is not you can't distinguish very many white aspects and things. Same applies to the black part. And the reason this can be described as a space is that distances in this space correspond to similarity. So red and orange are close points in the space, why red and green are distant points. They are far away in the space. And that means that red and orange are similar and red and green are not so similar. So spaces is a way of capturing our judgments of similarity. So far, I haven't said anything about language. But now we can say that color words correspond to regions of this color space. So red is one part of the color space, yellow is another part, and so on. And the meaning of color terms then correspond to regions of such spaces. I could talk about, there are other spaces like high and low or warm and cold. They are very simple because they are only one-dimensional. But color is interesting because it's a bit more complicated. And my idea is that the meaning of words somehow depend on structures, these similarity structures in spaces like that.
So some spaces would be three-dimensional, like your color space, which is like a wheel with two cones. But other spaces can be two-dimensional, like when you talk about hot and cold.
Yeah, no, that's one dimensional only. I mean, many dimensions are one dimensional, and then there are difficult spaces like shapes. I mean, shape is very complicated. You have round things, you have pointed things, you have star-shaped things, and so on. We don't really know how to describe shape space mathematically, but we know that things are similar. I mean, a star is more similar to I don't know what. I mean, or the shape of an apple is more similar to that of a pear than to that shape of a pencil. I mean, we know that there are similarity relations. So probably there is something like shape space, but we don't really know how to define it in mathematical terms. People have tried, but it's a difficult problem.
Yeah, and do you think that these sort of shape sort of spaces we have in our mind, do you think that they form sort of a part of the brain which is very almost like prehistoric? It's something that existed before language existed?
Yeah. I mean, take color. I mean, that's really prehistoric. I mean, it existed way before. Lots of animals have color perception, and they can classify things by colors. They have to know whether a fruit is ripe or not. I mean, then you have to judge the color of the fruit. So lots of these spaces are appear in our evolution way before language did, and that's a point of mine that the language, the meaning of words depend on structures that are already available in our brains. Some of them we learn through culture. I mean, we have lots of kinship terms in languages. I mean, talking about relatives and so on, and they are partly culturally dependent. We can't see whether somebody is an uncle or not. We have to learn it somehow. But many of these spaces are established way before we know anything about language.
Yeah, interesting. It's funny though, but if to use your specific example, if I think about my family relations, in my mind I do visualize a tree, but
exactly.
I don't know if that's the opposite. If the language has led to the visualization or the other way around.
But a tree can also be seen as a kind of spatial structures. There are similarities. You're more similar to your sister than you are to your great aunt. I mean, there are distances in these spaces as well, and these distances are used when we classify our relatives. So you can say that kinship terms also correspond to regions of this kinship tree.
Yeah, interesting. So I was wondering if, apart from the color and the temperature, do you have any more examples of some of these spaces, maybe to help people really understand?
Yeah, shape space is important. I mean, even though I can't describe it, it's important because when children are learning language, learning the first nouns of their mother tongue, the shapes of objects are very, very important. I mean, you learn the shape of a duck, and even if it's a plastic duck in your bathtub, you call it a duck because you recognize it by the shape. I mean, the color is maybe bright yellow. It's not like any real duck, but it's the shape that determines the meaning of the word duck for when children learn the meaning. And then, of course, as you grow up, as you learn more things about duck, you know that it's much more than the shape that's important.
Well, that's really interesting. I never thought about how a bathtub duck is bright yellow. It's bizarre.
Exactly.
Yeah, wow, yeah. Interesting. And as well, is there any relationship between these sort of shapes where words exist and sound symbolism, like the way that words sound based on their...
There is a little bit of sound symbolism in all languages, but it's not very strong. I mean, there are some languages like Japanese or the African language Wolof that has a fair amount of sound symbolism. But in general, our words are more or less arbitrary. They don't describe. They don't represent anything in a way that looks like or sounds like the meaning of the word.
So, do you know if these kind of shape spaces, if they're similar across all languages, or does this only apply to English?
No. I mean, this is what I said. I mean, most of these basic domains, as I call them, or spaces, they are common to all humans. I mean, the colors, shapes, sounds, sizes, they are all common part of our perceptual mechanism. Then, of course, there are some cultural things. I mean, in some cultures you talk about witches and goblins, and in other cultures you talk about other things. And so we have created some cultural spaces that, of course, differ. But for the basic part of language, we have a lot of things common because we're all human and we all have the same perceptual mechanisms.
Well, that sort of brings me on to my next question, which is there sort of a crossover between these conceptual spaces and maybe like metaphor, like in terms of like, you know, what Lakoff proposed, like, for example, you know, up is good and down is bad. Is there a crossover between?
Yeah, there is a relation. I use my spaces to analyze metaphor because when you talk about the metaphor, you use another space to talk about a more abstract thing. So just to take a simple example, when you listen to musical tones, we use the term high and low tones. I mean, this is one of Lakoff's examples. So for us, this vertical dimension, high, low, is mapped onto our perception of the sound. I mean, the sound is not literally high and not literally low. This is a metaphor. And for us, it's so obvious. I mean, we learned this mapping from the vertical dimension to sounds when we were kids, and we don't think about it as a metaphor. But then if you look at another language, I mean, I happen to know that in Turkish, the tones are not high and low. They are thin or thick, which is a different metaphor. What we call a high tone is thin in Turkish, and what we call a low tone is thick. That's a different mapping. It's still a metaphor, but it's another way of conceptualizing the meaning of high and low tones. So we know what perceptually they mean, but we have to describe them with other words. Use a metaphor to describe the distinction. Yeah, to give you another rather funny example I learned about recently is that for us it's so obvious that May comes after April, and April comes after March. We use this after and before. This is a temporal relation, and it's so obvious. But in Chinese or in Mandarin, May comes under April.
So their months are like this.
They write the months: January, February, March, April, and so on. For them, writing is vertical, and so May comes under April. And that's a different preposition, but it's a metaphor, of course.
So maybe we have like language and meaning, and then we have metaphor, but these conceptual spaces are like another layer of abstraction almost.
Metaphors are mapping abstract notions onto more concrete spaces, but sometimes you can choose the space you map onto. I mean, high, low, or thin, thick is a choice of what kind of mapping you're doing in your language. And of course, you have to be aware of these mappings when you teach another language. I mean that in most Indo-European languages we use high and low for tones, for instance, and we use before and after for temporal relations. But as I just given you examples, there are languages which don't have these mappings, have other mappings.
Do you think that that some of your ideas could be used as a basis for teaching? Because, you know, a lot of language teaching starts with grammar. So you sort of learn grammar and then you sort of put in vocabulary into the correct sort of structure. But maybe this is a different way to view language completely?
For me, semantics are organized in these domains. I mean, there are color words, there are shape words, there are size words, and so on. And when you go to kindergarten, they practice kids on these color words. They have 1 week when they're practicing color words. Next week they're practicing number words, and so on. And maybe that's a good idea even in second language teaching, to focus on the domain and look at the structures. I mean, look at, say, kinship terms. What are the English kinship terms? I mean, there are differences between Swedish and English in our terms. I mean, you have grandfather and grandmother. We make a distinction between father's father and mother's father, and has different terms for this. So this is something you have to be aware of, the differences in how you partition the domain. And even color terms are different in different languages, even if most Indo-European languages have basically overlapping color terminology.
Do you think it would be possible to produce a kind of like an index or a map of all of these spaces that you believe that exist that you could then use? Maybe that's an impossible task.
For the basic ones, yes. I mean, the kinship, you could go draw this tree of kinship terms, and then you could mark which ones are called aunt, which ones are called cousin, because that differs in different languages. And some languages have very fine terminology, some have rougher ones. And you could use, I mean, this is like using Pictionaries. I mean, Pictionaries are a way of describing the meaning of duck by drawing a duck. You can describe color terms by having a color space and then say what it's called in different languages. So extending the idea of Pictionaries to include all the entire domains, the entire spaces, would be a good thing, I think.
How does this idea work with more kind of abstract concepts like love or hate, or that don't seem to, you can't touch them or see them? Or
no, that's problematic, because these abstract terms we don't have very good mental images of them, and they are really our democracy for that matter. I mean, it's another difficult term. Or inflation. I mean, inflation means blowing up a balloon, but what has that to do with economy? I mean,
well, everybody knows that democracy is an American flag with an eagle.
Yeah. No, I mean that's difficult, the most abstract terms, but. For concrete words, more concrete, more down to earth words, I think this strategy could be of some help.
What do you see as some of the future directions of this research? Like where do you sort of go from here?
I mean, you prompted me to think a little bit about applications for second language teaching. I haven't really thought about it, and I think that there could be some ideas I could, but I haven't developed them at all. So that's something I may think about in the future. I have been involved in programs of developing robots and teaching robots to speak. I mean, to communicate. To teaching to speak is not a problem, because the speech generation programs are very good at the moment, and that's not the problem. The problem is to have them speak meaningfully and be able to communicate with people. And then you have to understand a lot about these metaphors, and a very difficult thing for a robot is to understand pronouns. Because I've been talking about the person, and then I refer back to her with she 10 sentences later. And how can the robot know that what am I referring to? I mean, it's a very difficult problem. As humans, we don't think about how we solve it. We do it extremely efficiently. Prepositions it's one of the more difficult things to learn when you're learning a second language, because prepositions are very different between languages. Just to give you very trivial examples. In English, you say that the stars are in the sky. And in Swedish we say, and in German you say they are on the sky. And in English you say the fly is on the ceiling. And in Swedish we say it's in the ceiling. So it's a total reversal of on and in these applications. You have to learn these cases. There is nothing natural to it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the way that I teach that, because the second problem in English is the way that we use these prepositions in phrasal verbs. And so
yes.
learners, they look at a dictionary of phrasal verbs and they think, oh my God, this is impossible. Mm-hmm. And so the way I teach it is I kind of use the metaphor. I say, for example, in is about, you have a space and something exists inside that space. And that's why I'm really interested in this idea of conceptual spaces, because I was reading recently about, there's this Polish linguist, I can't remember her name.
I think you're talking about Wierzbicka.
I think so, and she developed these things called semantic primes.
Yes, I know them, yes.
That would be a fantastic basis for a textbook instead of grammar,
Yeah. My program is a little bit different. I mean, she has these 30, 40, I don't know, semantic primitives. Instead of these, I do the spaces. So I categorize these semantic structures in terms of these domains or spaces, colors, shapes, and so on, and use them to define the meanings of different words. It doesn't work so well with nouns, because nouns, they have different properties. A dog has a size and a shape and a smell and a sound and a weight, and it has properties in all kinds of domains. But for adjectives and verbs, it works quite well.
I think it could be a fantastic basis for second language learning. Absolutely. Even if it was to just, as you say, even if it just clarified the differences between a native language and a...
But to go back to my example with the stars in the sky, in English, you perceive the sky as a container, so it's in the sky. And Swedish German has on the sky, because we rely on the old picture that the sky was some kind of surface where the stars were stuck in this surface. That's why they're on the sky.
I wondered if I could just ask you a sort of a more personal question, because you obviously speak English fantastically. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with learning English?
It's very complicated, because at school they try to teach us the Queen's English, the British version. Then I spent a year as a PhD student at Princeton in the United States, and more recently I've spent extended periods in Australia and in South Africa. So I have no idea what my English sounds like in terms of dialect or whatever. But of course I've been exposed to English. I write in English. I talk English to my PhD students. We have foreign PhD students, so English is working language for me. Very much.
I was wondering, how that process was for you, because I know that a lot of students, they start to learn and then they realize how difficult it is and they give up, or maybe they have an experience in the classroom where to them language is all just about memorization.
My experience was that when I finished high school, we had a fairly good education. I could read English without any problems. My spoken English wasn't very good. And then I spent this academic year in the United States. And then I practiced. I was stuttering, I was stumbling, but after this year, I was much more fluent in English. And then after that, I spent a lot of my life talking, writing English.
What would you say to any kind of student out there who is maybe, has maybe been trying to learn English for years and they've failed, and what's the sort of, and I know that this is not your field of expertise, but do you have any advice for that kind of student?
When I was a young student, I was kind of shy, so I was afraid of speaking English. But I think the best advice from my point of view is don't be shy. Just try your best. And it doesn't matter if you fail, if you make mistakes and so on. The important thing is that you can communicate, that you can get your ideas, your desires through to somebody else. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. I think that's a very important thing. And then by practicing, you improve your English.
I don't want to keep you any longer. I know that you're a busy man. And I just want to say thanks so much for generously donating your time today.
Well, thanks for a very interesting chat, and I hope you got some ideas about how to use conceptual spaces in your education.
I did, thank you, and I'm looking forward to this gigantic map you're going to produce for us that details all of the spaces.
Okay.